Hello and welcome to Brokenomics. Now, many times through this series I've made reference to something called the dollar, but I've not really gone into any much detail on that. However, I've got just the man for doing that. Justin, thank you for coming on Brokenomics.
Hi Dan, thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's good to be here. Yeah, looking forward to our chat. A lot to unpack. So
excellent.
Yeah.
And you've been writing on the dollar for a while now. Where can people find your writings?
Yes, most of my writing is on Substack.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I write there quite a lot. So yeah, I've got a lot of articles on political economy, history, economics, a lot of things really. So that's where all my work on the dollar is. And if you want to refer back to anything in this conversation, that would be the best place.
Excellent. And your Twitter handle is the Nomad, is it?
Yes, that's right. My daily frustrations with modernity can be found there. Obviously, I promote my Substack articles too, and that's right. Yeah.
Excellent. So to kick us off on the dollar, perhaps I can read one of the opening paragraphs to sort of just give us a sense for going into it.
Sure.
You write, the United States is the dominant superpower in the world today, a position it has held since the end of World War II. United States gross domestic product is the world's largest, currently standing at 26 trillion annually, compared with a world GDP of 105 trillion, so a substantial proportion of world GDP. It has assembled the most formidable military in recorded human history, with approximately 750 military bases across the world. Meanwhile, the US is able to consume energy and resources at an unimaginable scale, despite being only 4% of the world's population.
That's right.
So they're certainly punching above their weight then.
Yes, that's right. I think my writing tries to advance the idea that the American empire is predicated on what I have come to call the dollar system. And by that I mean the United States, its grip on the monetary system, which really revolves around the US dollar's position as the world reserve currency. Were it not for the dollar system, the American empire would be very different to what it is today. And a lot of those numbers you read out, some of which really defy any kind of meaningful comparison, really, when we get to the budget deficit and the trade deficit and military expenditures. But the main point is that all of this is made possible by the dollar system and the position of the US dollar in the global economy.
Well, there's this idea, isn't there, of American exceptionalism, and I'm sure they are, or have been, somewhat exceptional, but not that much.
Yes, that's right. That's a point I make in the article in The Empire of Dollars. American exceptionalism, it's a bit of a fluffy term, it has different definitions, but it's something that says that Americans are hardworking and patriotic, but they're also creative and innovative, and this is the reason why the US economy is so successful and whatnot. However, that is not the reason why the US is the uncontested global hegemonic superpower.
I mean, there is some truth in that. I mean, they have historically worked quite hard, not quite as much as some people around the world in terms of hours they put in. Innovation, that bit is genuine, I'd say. And in fact, actually, that's the only metric by which the US is really still leading.
That's right,
is the innovation rates. They've got that. So I mean, I did a Brokenomics on Japan not that long ago, and they really shined when it comes to electrical engineering, and they had a sort of strong period there. But what they did not adapt to well was software, and that's something, of course, the Americans do seem to adapt to quite well.
Yes.
So they do have legitimate advantages, and they do have, as a continental landmass, of course, a great starting position.
Yes,
if this was a game of civilization, they've got a great starting position. They've got energy, and they've got no enemies on the borders. They've got good agricultural land.
Very
and all
difficult
that kind of
to penetrate.
So they genuinely have a lot going for them, but it doesn't account for the share of transactions, the share of energy, and all the rest of it that they actually command.
Yes, that's right. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Some certain aspects of American industry, like you say, innovation, are very impressive. But by my reading, the primary reason why the US is the global superpower today is that the United States can print, borrow, issue and spend its own currency in international markets without suffering from mass sort of hyperinflation and a complete collapse of the economy. Other countries simply cannot do this. They have to operate with restraint and more discipline in monetary affairs. And if the US didn't have control of the monetary system, then it would have to fundamentally alter its tax, its debt, its spending, and its energy policies, many of which are incredibly sort of imbalanced. But again, these structural imbalances are sustainable as long as essentially the US can sort of just print the dollar by decree at will, and that's it's basically the system we have.
It sounds like that you agree with my sort of take that it's a bit difficult to tell with the US dollar and the US military. A bit like the chicken and the egg, which one came first.
Yes, yeah.
I suppose it probably was the military, but it is the dollar that I do think is their central super weapon. It's not the nukes, it's not the aircraft carriers, it's the dollar. That's
a centre of gravity for the US empire, really. I mean, we recognise America as a military, industrial, cultural, economic superpower, and that's completely correct. But a lot of this is predicated on top of the dollar and the fact that the US dollar is, of course, is the world reserve currency. Naturally, if the dollar lost its central position in the global economy, American influence in these spheres would naturally diminish as a result.
Perhaps quite considerably.
Yes, absolutely. So, that's an idea.
Yeah, I mean, still in the introduction, you go on to say the US dollar is used in around 85% of foreign exchange transactions worldwide.
That's right, yeah.
Over 59% of foreign currency reserves held by other central banks are in dollars. It is estimated that at least 90% of world trade takes place in dollars.
Yes, that's right. So the main component of the dollar system is that the US dollar is the world reserve currency. So what that means is that it's the currency, it's the strongest currency. It has, it's the most liquid, most traded currency around. So organizations, manufacturers, suppliers, and even sovereign governments choose to settle their payments predominantly in US dollars. So the US dollar is the currency of choice for goods, services, trade, travel, assets, investments, commodities, oil, and from here, and this makes it the strongest and most liquid currency available, far more so than any other currency.
But of course, at that sort of levels, 90% of world trade taking place in dollars. I mean, we're talking about, South Africa wants to sell something to Brazil.
Exactly, yeah. That's absolutely right. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, so South Africa is selling some sort of commodity to Brazil, or I don't know, an Indian software company is providing backup services to a company in Argentina. Well, the Argentine peso, the Indian rupee, is not used in the transaction. They pay each other in US dollars. That's because there's only a certain amount of demand, sometimes called effective demand, for the peso or the rupee. They're not as freely tradable as the US dollar, and that's for layman's. That's quite an important.
I mean, this came up recently with Saudi Arabia. Obviously Saudi Arabia is incentivized post. Cause we had the Russian situation where Russia upset the US, and so they decided they were just going to take all of their reserve assets, and that sent everybody around the world thinking, okay, well, I would like to be able to find an alternative. Because I might do something that upsets the US one day, then it could happen to me. And so India then got itself into this situation where it was having this discussion with Saudi Arabia, saying, "Can we pay for oil in rupees?" And the stumbling block is, of course, that Saudi Arabia turns around and says, "Well, okay, so I give you a whole bunch of oil. I've now got a whole bunch of rupees, what do I do with them?
Right.
What am I going to do with all of these rupees?
Yes, that's right. That's a problem that exists in the global economy. Really, there's a finite amount of demand for currencies outside of really the dollar, the euro, a few other European ones, some of the East Asian ones as well. Again, effective demand means that these other currencies, especially from the global south, are not as freely tradable as the US dollar. The dollar is a medium of exchange, a store of value, in a way that few other currencies are. Now, Saudi Arabia might be able to use a few of those rupees, perhaps for other services, but do you want to constantly be trading in pesos, rupiahs, Brazilian reals, or other currencies?
Whereas the US dollar is basically a sort of universal currency.
Yes, absolutely. It's
Saudi Arabia, once it's got those dollars, what can it do with them? Well, pretty much anything it wants.
Yes, absolutely.
Whereas if it's got rupees, it's like, well, okay, I'm going to have to go and buy something denominated in rupees, which is going to be investment into India.
Yes, this is the problem. Yeah, really. Other countries will not have, if they don't, in your example, if they don't have a lot of trade with India, then there's no need to hold rupees.
Yes.
And so this is where the US dollar is, again, the most strongest, most liquid currency available. Of course, currencies in the global south, whilst they've made great economic strides and they have impressive industries of their own, natural resources, minerals, commodities, their currencies aren't as stable as the dollar, as the euro perhaps, and they're subject to a lot more volatility, commodity shocks, for example. So countries aren't gonna have their wealth in these currencies really. So that's again what. But I think the important thing is I call it the dollar system because that's what it is. It isn't just a unit of currency. It's many things that sort of form part of a self-reinforcing cycle of monetary sort of power. So
many layers that have got us to this point. Well, that brings me to one of the first sections in your article. You talked about Bretton Woods and the Nixon shock. So again. Your words here. The first of these is the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944, where the US dollar was made the world's reserve currency. That meant the dollar would be the principal medium of exchange in international trade and finance. The second occurred in 1971, when President Richard Nixon removed the dollar's link to gold unilaterally, ending the convertibility to overseas dollars into gold, therefore removing the last constraint on money creation.
correct.
So tell us about this. Let's start with Bretton Woods. I mean, each of these we could do a Brokenomics on them, just those topics.
That's just it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Petrodollar, Bretton Woods, US Treasuries.
Well,
you could do.
What's the short version of Bretton Woods?
Right. So as World War II was coming to a close, allies from 44 countries met together at Bretton Woods in New Hampshire at the Mount Washington Hotel to basically build a new international system for trade and finance. And it was decided that the US dollar would be the central currency, and that's where it gained its status as the world reserve currency. And it hasn't vacated that position since. Really, at Bretton Woods, American power was formalized in the eyes of the world, and this is why it's such a important sort of event. I mean, America was the world's foremost industrial, military and economic power at the time. It had 2/3 of the world's gold. The rest, the remainder, mainly lay with the Soviet Union. So
the way I tend to sort of glibly cover that area of history is that after the Second World War, America found itself with all of the gold because they were either a safe haven or they were the only functional economy.
Absolutely,
and they were sort of basically of the view that they wanted to keep it.
Yes.
So they wanted to tell everybody that dollars were exactly as good as gold.
Yes. Yeah.
So we get into that point. But the important thing for me, the Bretton Woods, is that they promised to protect international shipping. So that was a key part of the promise. We will protect international trade if international trade is done in dollars.
Yes. Yeah.
So when you see, for example, that Houthi situation that we've got going on in the Red Sea at the moment,
racket.
yeah. The British sent a ship. It's not actually the British's job to do that anymore. There might have been a time, but now it is literally the US's job to protect international shipping routes. That's why we use the dollar as international currency. And the thing that I found most interesting from that is that lots of ships are now re-registering themselves as Chinese, because the Chinese policy of not intervening around the world makes them less of a target. So the Chinese system is offering a superior protection system to the US, because the punishment for upsetting the Chinese is they won't trade with you, and everybody kind of wants to.
Everybody needs to trade with China. Yes, that's quite interesting. I hadn't picked up on that actually, but you're definitely right when you say the main shipping routes throughout the world, the main choke points. So Suez, the Strait of Hormuz, the South China Sea. Most of these are defended by the US, because world trade runs on dollars, and the problem for Washington, if world trade stops, then trade in the dollar does, and then we've got a whole series, a cascading series of economic effects, collateral effects that come from that. And yes, you're right, that explains the situation with the Houthi rebels.
Well, and of course, the flip side of it is not just that they are guaranteeing trade, but also they can interdict trade that they don't approve of.
Yes.
Because if you control the seas, if you control the shipping lanes, you can make sure that certain trade does not happen, embargoes can take place. There are many embargoes in place at the moment, most notably on Iran and North Korea, but there are many others if you go down the list. So the US is not just securing trade; it is also preventing trade as well. It is shaping the world in a way that it wants. The interesting thing for me on this, though, is that I asked myself the question: how does the US interdict a freight shipment travelling from rail between Russia and China?
Much harder to do that.
Much harder to do that.
Yes.
They might be able to do it, but only at significant. With a significant military intervention, yes. So we could be moving to a world where Eurasia, the right hand side of Europe and much of Asia, Southeast Asia, and so on, is moving out of the orbit of the US.
Well, of course, another big development in the geopolitical arena from China is the Belt and Road Initiative. So this is where China's trying to sort of build really a worldwide on land and sea kind of infrastructure for Chinese trade to facilitate Chinese trade, presumably independent of the protection racket from the United States, which probably a lot of people feel exacts a bit too much privilege and too many benefits and too much autonomy in trade and in world affairs more generally. And by the same token, unfortunately, the ironic thing is for us Brits is they're sort of taking over a lot of the British sort of ports in Burma, Bangladesh, the Bay of Bengal as well, and they're kind of trying to sort of circumvent India. And so they're doing that alongside the overland one. Now there's lots of issues. There's lots of they've run into a lot of issues, but that's ongoing too. But yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, the United States is technically it's the only country that can project power from anywhere in the world. Its fleet is formidable. I think they're replacing the Nimitz class of carriers with an upgraded one called the Gerald Ford class of naval carriers. But even though the Nimitz class is far superior to anything that Russia has and China has, I think even if you add all the naval carriers up combined, the United States still has many more. But again, they can do this because the dollar is the world reserve currency, and if they need, they need funds for research, for development, for innovation, they can do this a lot easier than other countries. So it comes back round to the same sort of
So Bretton Woods is when they make the promise that, trust us, the dollar is as good as gold.
Absolutely, yeah.
Tell us what happened in 1971 with the Nixon shock. Having made this promise that the dollar is definitely as good as gold.
Yeah, so the two main components of the US dollar, not the dollar system, is the fact that it's the world reserve currency. And the second, as I explain, is that after 1971, it effectively became a floating fiat currency. That means it was backed by nothing apart from trust and faith in the dollar.
So pre-1971, it was backed by gold, as was promised by the Bretton Woods Agreement.
Yes, absolutely.
And after 1971, Nixon basically just decided no.
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, your Brokenomics episode on 71 was very good. I'd encourage people to go and watch that. But yeah, before 71, what happened is that dollars could be exchanged for gold at a fixed rate of 35 US dollars per troy ounce. That's where the phrase "as good as gold" comes from, because the dollar could quite literally be traded on demand for gold if signatory countries felt that the system was in jeopardy, or if they, if they had issues with what was going on. But the problem is, for a number of reasons, the US was basically printing too many dollars, far more dollars than they had in gold, and gold mining was quite slow, quite porous at the time. Mainly owing to the Vietnam War, but also Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, the Cold War as well, the space race, the arms race. So basically, the long and short of it is, effectively, the Bretton Woods system sort of gradually fell apart. And in 1971, the Nixon administration basically, they unilaterally, as I say, abolished convertibility of overseas dollars into gold. And as you rightly say, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government policy. And
yes, it was supposed to be a temporary measure, wasn't it? Yes.
But so that's that kind of, if in a way, that basically sort of rescued the dollar, because at the time inflation was high, unemployment was high, and it was a very unstable period in
and essentially the US was spending more than it should be able to, and rather than cut spending, it just pulled a fast one.
Exactly, they just relieved themselves of their obligations altogether. The Bretton Woods system was over, and as I certainly believe, Nixon basically ushered in the birth of the modern world and remade the world economy forever. Because in terms of monetary affairs, if we talk about post World War II, there is no more significant event than the end of the gold standard, the Nixon.
Well, there almost certainly wouldn't be a Brokenomics series if we were still on a hard money standard, because when government spent too much, they would be forced to then spend less, and things would correct themselves.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.